Main event of the evening.
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today we are discussing Season 10, Episode 16, Nervous Romance.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens in Nervous Romance.
Marion and Howard surprise Fonzie and Ashley with a cake to celebrate their 6-month anniversary.
My anniversary? Where are my presents?
Fonzie remarks he's never had an anniversary before, and Ashley admits she's surprised they made it this long after their first date. Roger says Fonzie was a nervous wreck before the date.
You should have seen Fonzie. He was a nervous wreck.
Really? I never heard this.
Me neither.
And at some prompting, tells the story. 6 months ago, after Fonzie made his date with Ashley, Roger and Potsy showed up to comfort him after assuming that Ashley turned him down.
She's stuck up. She's boring. She's an old dish rag.
Oh, yeah? She's going out with me.
She's beautiful. She's charming. She's the luckiest girl in the world.
Fonzie sent Potsy into his office and sort of asked Roger for advice. He's so nervous that his hands are sweating, a first for him. Roger suggests a posh little restaurant instead of a mobile home show like Fonzie was thinking. Back in the present, Howard starts to compare the situation to his and Marion's first date.
I'll never forget. We got
Howard, not now, dear.
But she says to save it for their anniversary, when everyone has to be polite. Heather remarks that Ashley was nervous before the date too, and in a flashback, she's doing her homework, finger painting President Lincoln, as her mother asks for advice on what dress to wear. Naturally, Heather got paint on the white one, and then there was a message from the babysitter she couldn't come. Ashley rushed to her room, and that was when Fonzie arrived. He gave Heather a present, winning her over.
Can you take Mommy out every night?
I like your attitude.
And when Ashley came out, he gave her a plastic corsage. With no babysitter, Heather had no choice but to come along, something Fonzie approved of. After cleaning Heather off, they went to the restaurant Whale and Snail, and it was indeed posh. The maitre d' is snooty to them, because there's 3 of them instead of the 2 with the reservation.
Well, there must be some mistake. Your reservation is for 2, and there are clearly 3 of you.
Yeah. 2 adults and a kid, so what?
So you'll wait.
But Fonzie threatened him into giving them a table anyway. Ashley, as it turns out, is fluent in French.
Oui, très bien. Moi, je prendrai les cuisses de grenouille poirière, le petit steak au point.
Unlike their waiter, who was just doing an accent to work through college. After ordering, they made awkward small talk, hindered by Fonzie thinking French impressionists do impressions, like of Ed Sullivan. The waiter brought them meat, raw meat. Fonzie sent it back.
I'll tell the chef to cook it. I thought the chef would know that by now.
Heather complained about another customer's cigar smoke, and Fonzie politely asked him about it. The smoker told him to buzz off, so Fonzie grabbed the cigar and tossed it away, after which he dumped a bucket on his head and tossed him into the kitchen.
When you're in there, check my steak, will you?
Fonzie is asked to leave the restaurant by the maitre d', who has no sympathy for Fonzie's attempts to impress his date.
Look, I just came in here. I'm with my girl. I'm trying to impress her.
You failed.
Heather is still hungry, so Fonzie took the 2 of them to Arnold's. Heather liked it much better, even if Ashley had previously said to her daughter that it was a dive. Fonzie broke down, and admitted his worries about tonight, not helped by Heather complaining that her bun had seeds.
I can't even get the right buns.
Ashley admitted that it was funny when Fonzie ruined the root smoker's evening, and that she's wished she could do that too. But that's not the sort of thing you do to your father, and it was exciting, like being out with the Cisco kid.
You like the Cisco kid?
Yeah. We watch him every Saturday morning.
Fonzie hit the jukebox and danced with Heather, and then Ashley took her place to sway with Fonzie. Back in the present, Howard tries to tell his and Marion's first date story, but Ashley has to put Heather to bed.
That's quite a story, but I'm afraid it doesn't quite rival the time that
We'd love to
Marion
hear about it, Howard, but I think it's Heather's bedtime.
Oh, yeah, well, here we go.
And Roger leaves to look at his calendar and see if his birthday falls on a weekend this year. Alone with Marion, Howard starts to tell the story. It was raining, the Packer got stuck in the mud, they spent the night in the hayloft. But Marion says she was never in a hayloft with Howard. Howard goes upstairs, Marion on his tail demanding names.
But I want names or you're gonna have to sleep in a hayloft.
Thank you, Peter. That was Nervous Romance. It first aired back on February 1st, 1983, Happy Days was followed by a new episode of Laverne and Shirley, in which Laverne infiltrates a fashion show because she's jealous of the models being photographed by her boyfriend.
That's what you do all day. You take pictures of beautiful girls who know how to do things. I don't know how to do things, and they don't know how to sweat.
CBS aired the second half of The Shaggy DA on The Wonderful World of Disney. Again, Dean Jones is a young lawyer who was turned into a dog by a magic ring. And NBC reran episode 2 of Shogun, a lavish 1980 miniseries based on the novel by James Clavell.
Shogun, the novel. Shogun, the film. Shogun, the week on NBC.
Richard Chamberlain plays an English navigator named John Blackthorne who becomes involved in political intrigue in feudal Japan. In this episode, Blackthorne is rescued from prison and becomes the aide to a powerful lord played by Toshiro Mifune. So, Peter, of those three choices, what are you watching?
I'm feeling cultured tonight, and I love Toshiro Mifune. Shogun it is.
I have to commit to the second half of The Shaggy DA because I watched the first half last week, and I got to know how it turns out. Does he become DA? Also, you might notice that in the last few weeks, NBC has just been running a grab bag of programs. We had the return of Maxwell Smart, the return of the Doberman Gang, a report on the labor market, and now Shogun. It's because NBC doesn't know what to do with its Tuesday nights, but they are going to figure it out very soon. And that change in the programming, Peter, is going to eventually kill Happy Days. Nervous Romance was directed by Jerry Paris, and it was written by Robert Keats. This was Robert's only Happy Days script. Aww. But he also wrote Unblansky's Beauties, plus Quark and Rocky Road, plus Down to Earth, a sitcom about a 1920s flapper who comes back as a ghost to help a 1980s family and earn her wings in heaven.
60 years later, the opportunity to help a family came through.
Boop, 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 de-doo.
I had never heard of this show, but it ran multiple seasons. Later in his career, Robert wrote the Disney made-for-TV movie Mom's Got a Date with a Vampire. Sadly, he died of pancreatic cancer in 2017. Did you ever see Mom's Got a Date with a Vampire?
Nope. It was a little bit before my time in terms of Disney Channel original movies, but I wish I had seen it at the right age to see it.
As for guest stars this week, Robin Bach returns as our maitre d'.
Welcome to Quail and Snail. A touch of Paris on your plate.
You may remember Robin from a similar role in Another Night at Antoine's back in season 9. As a reminder, Robin was a character actor from New Jersey who was typecast as waiters and clerks. He died in 1991. Peter, what did you think of Robin Bach as our maitre d'?
I recently read an article online about this exact trope, the trope of the boorish Americans who go to a snooty French restaurant and end up causing chaos by their dint of their boorish Americanness. And one of the requirements of that is that it has to have an intimidating, mean maitre d'. We also saw this all the way back in Another Night at Antoine's, but I think this is even more purely that. And Robin Bach does that perfectly. He was perfect in Another Night at Antoine's. He's perfect here too. And here he gets to be even meaner. And it's great.
Robin Bach might be my single favorite element of this episode. As you mentioned, this is all tropes about visiting the fancy French restaurant. In sitcoms and cartoons for decades, when a husband or boyfriend wanted to take his girlfriend or wife out for a fancy night in the town, they'll go to a snooty French restaurant, and there's always mean waiters and maitre d's like this. Robin Bach is perfect for this part. And of course, he became typecast as that. So this is the kind of part he played over and over again just because he's so good at it. We also have Andrew Levant as Jacques, a.k.a. Jack.
I am Jacques, your waiter for this evening.
Andrew had a brief acting career in the 1980s and 90s. You could have seen him on Mr. Merlin and Baywatch. Peter, what did you think of Andrew Levant as Jacques or Jack?
He's basically just there for the one joke about the fact that he's only pretending to be French so he can work here. And I love the implication that if you want to work here, you have to pretend to be French. Because that's the kind of place that this is. It's the kind of place that requires you to pretend to be French. Probably because there aren't that many actual French people in Milwaukee.
I was just hearing about how cast members at Disneyland have to stay in character all the time.
Yeah, it totally has that energy. Also, maybe a little bit medieval times.
Now I'm thinking of that scene in The Cable Guy where Janine Garofalo is working for medieval times and she has to serve Matthew Broderick and Jim Carrey, and she's obviously being forced to talk in this very stilted way.
Welcome to medieval times. I'll be your serving wench, Melinda. Might I fetch you something from the barkeep?
Last but not least, we have William Sumper as our customer.
Would you put your face out? It's bothering me.
William was a New York actor who worked mainly in TV from the late 60s to the early 80s. Gary Marshall used him 5 different times on Laverne and Shirley. He also appeared on 10 Speed and Brown Shoe, Gunsmoke, and The Invaders, plus the made-for-TV movies Mae West, More Than Friends, and Do Not Fold, Spindle, or Mutilate.
Strive at all times to bend, fold, spindle, and mutilate.
He died in 1999. Peter, what did you think of William Sumper as our customer?
He was great. He was just a complete jerk. But at the same time, I feel like he probably comes across more as a jerk to us because we live in a world where we've had it repeatedly hammered into our heads that secondhand smoke is extremely dangerous. And this guy is from the 1960s. It may or may not be post-Surgeon General's warning that smoking can cause cancer. But even so, smoking is still generally pretty societally accepted. So really, Fonzie is ahead of the curve.
I found myself wondering if they had to do multiple takes of the scene where Fonzie dumps water all over the guy's head. For William Sumper's sake, I hope they only had to do it once. As for songs this week, at Arnold's we hear Easier Said Than Done by the Essex and Blowin' in the Wind by Peter, Paul and Mary. We've heard both of those many times before. Very faintly at Ashley's apartment, we hear Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major number 2. Chopin wrote a trio of nocturnes for solo piano between 1831 and 1832. The second is perhaps his most famous piece ever. You may have heard it in movies like Bad Santa and Waking Life, or on TV shows like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia and The Simpsons. Peter, are you familiar with this particular piece of music?
Yes, I am, thanks to pop cultural osmosis.
At Quail and Snail, we hear an instrumental version of Mona Lisa by Nat King Cole. This song was used frequently in the early seasons of Happy Days. Peter, do you remember when the music of Nat King Cole was a big part of Happy Days?
Oh, do I? And do I remember that it was usually performed by guys who kind of sounded like Nat King Cole, because they couldn't get the actual rights to Nat King Cole.
And Nat himself, unfortunately, was dead, so he couldn't come in and sing it for him. The song Fonzie plays for Ashley on the jukebox is Since I Fell for You by Lenny Welch, a hit from 1963.
When you just give love and never get love.
This song actually goes back to the 1940s and has been a pop and jazz standard ever since. It's charted for several artists, but Lenny's version was the most popular. As for cultural and historical references,
This isn't an anniversary, which comes from the Latin root word anna, meaning year. You see that? That's why you're alone.
the word anniversary comes from 2 Latin words, annus, which means year, and versus, which means turning. Heather says that Ashley put Parmesan cheese in the fishbowl.
She fed my goldfish Parmesan cheese.
This is a problem, since fish don't actually have the ability to process lactose. Even if they don't eat the cheese, it can cause a chemical imbalance in the water. So get that Parmesan cheese out of there as quickly as you can. Heather is finger painting a picture of Abraham Lincoln.
It's not a tree, it's President Lincoln.
Some of the most famous paintings of our 16th president were done by an artist named George Peter Alexander Healy. Lincoln sat for Healy in 1864, and the artist made sketches for paintings that were not actually completed until well after Lincoln's death. And we do get a look at Heather's painting. What did you think of it?
It does indeed look like a tree, like her mother said. Kind of fitting because he was very tall and he had brown hair.
He's our most tree-like president. Heather says, he's here.
He's here.
This is a cute in-joke reference to Heather O'Rourke's famous line from Poltergeist, "They're here." Of course, when you see the little girl from Poltergeist, you want her to say the one line,
Say the line, Bart. I didn't do it.
Fonzie says Ashley is more beautiful than Katharine Hepburn in The African Queen.
You are certainly more beautiful than Katharine Hepburn in The African Queen.
He's referring to a 1951 adventure film directed by John Huston, in which Hepburn plays a prim British missionary who is paired with a rough-mannered Canadian mechanic played by Humphrey Bogart. Together, they plot to sink a German gunboat in 1914. Peter, how familiar are you with The African Queen?
I have yet to see it, embarrassingly.
It used to play on television quite a lot, so my dad would watch it, and I would wander into the room and see like 20 minutes of it. And I have to say, in getting through that one paragraph of my notes, I knew I was going to call her a prim British monastery rather than a missionary. Fonzie cannot believe that people actually eat snails.
Do you believe
that people pay to eat snails.
While eating snails is taboo in some parts of the world, these small gastropods are considered edible in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Mediterranean countries like Spain, France, and Italy. In America, the euphemism escargot is used to describe edible snails. For most of history, snails were considered poverty food, but they have become a delicacy in more recent decades. I gotta ask, Peter, have you ever had escargot?
I have not.
Have you ever seen anybody eat escargot?
Nope. Honestly, it could just be that the entirety of popular culture is playing a prank on me to try and get me to eat snails by convincing me that it's something that fancy people do.
Well, that idea that it's something that fancy people do is a relatively recent and American idea. In the rest of the world, snails are something that you eat when you run out of every other food option, but we have turned it into this ridiculous part of the quote-unquote French restaurant experience.
We are just playing an embarrassing joke on rich people.
The maitre d' tells Heather not to touch the petit fours.
Young person, do not touch my petit fours.
That term also comes from French, and it means small oven. It can refer to small bite-sized cakes or savory appetizers.
I've had them lots of times. They're cute little cakes. You can get them at the bakery. They are perfect for small children.
I remember getting petit fours for Christmas one year, and that is a memory that has stayed with me for decades. Heather and Fonzie both attended Ridgemont Elementary School.
I go to Ridgemont.
I did too.
There is no such place in Wisconsin. Die-hard Happy Days fans do not go looking for Ridgemont Elementary School.
Don't make unnecessary journeys.
Fonzie and Ashley briefly and unsuccessfully discuss Impressionism.
And what would French Impressionists be without Ed Sullivan?
I have said that.
This was a style of painting that developed in the mid to late 1800s in France. Prominent Impressionists include Renoir, Degas, Manet, and Monet. Any feelings on Impressionist paintings?
When I was a small child, I was pretty obsessed with them, mostly Claude Monet. I really loved his water lilies. On a more philosophical note, I loved the idea that Impressionism was about conveying how a specific object looked to you at a specific period of time, to try and get people to see it as you saw it. So that was great.
I like the fact that in Impressionist paintings, you're supposed to see the individual brush strokes. I always like in art and music and other forms of expression where you can see part of the process of making it in the end product. More and more, everything that we consume these days is so perfected and processed that there is very little human about it. Impressionism goes against all of that. Now, of course, we have art created by computers, art created by AI.
Created by which we mean smashing previous artwork created by humans together and saying that it's new.
Fonzie thinks the term Impressionism refers to comedians who do impressions and mentions he especially likes the ones who do Ed Sullivan. In the early 1950s, a stand-up comedian from New York named Will Jordan caused a pop culture sensation with his impression of Sullivan, which he performed on Sullivan's own show.
In person on this stage for you next week, we're going to have on this stage in person for you next week 742 Polish dentists.
Ed was flattered, and soon it seemed like every comedian in the business was doing a Sullivan impression.
The late Ed Sullivan. Right here on our stage, 400 Polish dentists. Hey, thank you.
It was Jordan who came up with the catchphrase, a really big shoe. Fonzie accidentally orders steak tartare.
Steak tartare. Bon appetit.
This is a dish consisting of raw ground beef with various seasonings and often a raw egg yolk on top. It's usually an appetizer, and despite its name, was likely invented in the late 1800s in America. The name comes from the widespread myth that Mongol warriors, or Tartars, were thought to eat raw meat. A major plot point in this episode revolves around a character smoking a cigar in a restaurant. In the state of Wisconsin, all smoking was banned in restaurants in 2010. Peter, I know that you love smoking cigars in restaurants, but please, I'm asking you on behalf of this show to stop doing that.
You made your point so eloquently, I might just have to.
Fonzie, Ashley, and Heather bond over their mutual love of the Cisco Kid.
Oh, Cisco!
Oh, Poncho!
A fictional Mexican caballero created by O. Henry in 1907. The character has since been adapted to every possible medium. Cisco's sidekick Pancho debuted in the 1945 movie Return of the Cisco Kid. From 1950 to 1956, Duncan Ronaldo and Leo Carrillo starred in a popular Cisco Kid TV show. O Pancho, O Cisco was a catchphrase from that series.
Oh, Pancho! Oh, Cisco!
I think for most of us, what we know of the Cisco Kid comes from the song The Cisco Kid by War.
Cisco Kid was a friend of mine.
I I honestly had no idea before now that he had been created by O. Henry. That's pretty cool.
Other observations this week. This episode borrows no footage from A Woman Not Under the Influence. The scene where Fonzie and Ashley make a date is recreated from scratch with slightly different dialogue and camera angles.
Yeah, and you were afraid it was going to be a clip show.
When I saw the plot summary, I thought, oh gosh, are they doing a clip show to an episode that just ran a few weeks earlier? No, they wouldn't reuse footage from just several episodes earlier. I misjudged Happy Days in advance. I was wrong about that one. Fonzie's most badass moment in this episode comes when the smoker decides not to fight him, and Fonzie simply says, yeah.
Yeah, that was fun.
So, Peter, were there any outstanding Happy Days fashions in Nervous Romance?
We get to see the outfit that Ashley wore on her first date with Fonzie again. It's a very nice white and red number. It's a dress with kind of a Peter Pan collar and short sleeves. It kind of straddles the line between dressy and professional. It's very cute.
So, Peter, did you have any other observations that you wanted to make about Nervous Romance?
Potsy finally gets something to do. After weeks of being in the opening credits and nothing else, he gets to do something in this episode.
And as soon as he's on screen, what does Fonzie do? Send him away. And he spends half of his scene just in the bathroom from off screen. So we were teased with a little bit of Potsy. Did you find that you had missed Potsy in the interim?
I was very happy to see him. I didn't realize how much I missed him until I saw him again.
I missed him too, and it brought me back to the old days of Happy Days when Potsy was an integral part of the show. He hasn't been for a couple of years. So, Peter, I'll ask that age-old timeless question. Was this episode any good?
Surprisingly, yeah. It helps that we got an entire scene of Fonzie causing trouble in a snooty French restaurant of questionable authenticity. That was very fun. And I really like the detail that, despite the fact that it was kind of a disaster, Ashley actually really liked Fonzie see a random smoking ass. What for? And she kind of likes that about Fonzie. It kind of contradicts the Tom Hanks episode where she encourages him not to give in to his violent impulses. But I guess there are times to do that, you know? And he didn't really hurt the guy. He just dumped water on him and threw his cigar away.
I was surprised by how much I enjoyed Nervous Romance. I was dreading this one because I thought it was just going to be a rehash of A Woman Not Under the Influence, but it's not that at all. In fact, we get to see that story from a different angle. And the centerpiece of this is Fonzie causing chaos in a snooty French restaurant. And that's always fun for me. I almost always love scenes where characters are causing chaos in snooty places and causing the other people to be shocked and offended. And Nervous Romance was a ton of fun for me. I was glad to have Robin back on the show again as the maitre d'. And it ends in a very sweet moment at Arnold's where Fonzie and Ashley dance. It's also nice that he's taking the kid along with them on the date because Heather doesn't ever get to go out and do things.
The fact that Ashley and Heather are a family is, I think, part of what Fonzie likes about Ashley, because a big thing with Fonzie's character is that he really wants to have a stable family, unlike what he had growing up. And he's found that with the Cunninghams, and he's found that with Ashley and Heather.
This episode really illustrates why, in my opinion, Fonzie and Ashley should have gotten married. We're 10 seasons into the show. I don't see what they have to lose. Fonzie's womanizing days are behind him. Why not just have him get married?
Well, in season 11, it's more that they were cutting down for budget reasons. So maybe if the show had been doing slightly better, we could have had wedding bells.
I'm placing this all at the feet of the A-Team and NBC. They were the ones who prevented Happy Days from having the 11th season that it should have had. So, Peter, how can people keep up with us and find out about all the wonderful things that we are doing?
Listeners can follow us on Twitter at Fonzie Podcast. They can follow me on Twitter at Peter Volfranc. That's PeterVulfranc.
And they can follow me on Twitter at Joe_A_Blevins. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysreours.libsyn.com. And they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysreourspodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket for next week?
Next week, it's Heather's birthday. But unfortunately, a clerical error has sent Fonzie into an Army Reserves training camp in I'm Not at Liberty.
It sounds like Fonzie is on a collision course with wackiness in that episode, so see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
I've learned a few things in my life about snails. They don't care for salt, and they leave icky trails. It's pretty darn hard to tell one from the other, and French people like them with garlic and butter.
Young person, do not touch my petty fours.